So this is a first-person parkour game. You play as a super soldier in training under the gaze of your overlords as you try to make better and better times for each level on the map. But first, let's look at how we got to this point. So I woke up one morning from my deep slumber and thought I would give game development another try. For the last decade I've been trying to make games now and then, and I've made lots of prototypes for all kinds of things. The Pirate Island strategy game was a personal highlight of mine, but now the time has come to make a full game. I've always loved great movement-based FPS games like Mirror's Edge, Titanfall, and my beloved Dying Light 1. That is. The sense of speed and agility was always inspiring, so inspiring that I practiced parkour myself for about 2 years, and I have been keeping just as agile ever since. Nope. Nonetheless, I then decided to make a movement-based FPS game of my own. But I wanted my game to be different, unique, empowering, magical, grounded, but also unbelievable. But that all sounds really hard, so I started pretty simple, with the movement. I'm making my game in Unreal Engine and initially started out with the FPS template available. My strategy going into the project was to keep things simple and just focus on what was important. So I jumped into the blueprints of the character and started stripping everything from it that I didn't really need, like the gun, the arms, and the controller support stuff. And now I had a simple first-person controller that can run and jump. But movement-based games demand more than that. I wanted to add some kind of wall running. So in other movement-based FPS games, the controls tend to put you into this mode where you're locked onto a surface until you jump out of it. And while that can look and feel really cool, it can also make you feel a bit more on rails. And I wanted something a bit more raw, something that I think is quite common in parkour. The tic-tac. So tic-tac is a kind of wall step where you use the wall to get a higher jump in a certain direction to clear obstacles or grab ledges. Making this one of the main mechanics of my game would mean that the player would have to build up momentum and then perform good tic-tacs in succession to progress, which hopefully would then lead to a more responsive gaming experience. So I found a way to detect what was next to the character, and if there was something in the right height I could use as a place to tic-tac, I would allow the player to do a second jump, propelling the player outward and forward. This implementation was immediately fun to play with, and just this simple feature allowed me to make whole levels and I could begin challenging myself. To give the system a bit more variety, I also implemented a mantle feature which works by detecting if there's a ledge and space for me to crawl up onto. And to help me test the mantle, I created these height blocks so I could find a reasonable distance to jump to. More and more I felt connected to the world, and as I was playing around with the test levels I came up with another move that I love from parkour but I've never seen properly implemented in a game. The Kong. The Kong is a move where you use your arms for an extra jump. Now I didn't want to do an exact Kong, I just wanted to get the feeling of a Kong. So I implemented a feature where you had a small time period doing the mantle to perform an extra jump. This ended up being quite fun as it almost became a little mini game to get the perfect timing. It was tricky at times to get it right, but when you did, it felt really cool. But when you came from a lower angle and jumping upwards and then performing a Kong, it did not feel quite as right and it was a little overpowered. And I was trying to get this to feel right for a while and I almost scrapped it because it didn't work. But in the end I decided to have two different mantles. A mantle more similar to climbing up over a wall and a mantle where you have a more direct approach. This was a good compromise and kept the feeling I wanted. I also implemented a crouch and with that the ability to slide, and when that was all in place, the movement just clicked. To give everything some additional punch, I added some camera shake on jumps, some camera tilting on the wall runs, and gave everything a bit of a sound. One thing was still missing though. We need hands. Luckily I have a bunch of experience making stuff in Blender. I modeled out some arms relative to a camera, gave them some textures, rigged everything so it could be animated, and then I got started making animations for running, mantles, tic-tac, floating mid-air, and so on. And this whole process of creating assets in Blender for games and other projects is something I've done a lot, and if you're new to the channel then you can check out my other content, which is mostly tutorials on how to do all this stuff. I specifically recommend checking out the video on making characters for games as it's very relevant to the process I used for making this first-person character. When I then had my first-person character ready, I exported it to Unreal, began setting up the animation in Unreal's animation blueprints, and I gotta say, it wasn't easy. I had so many different movement states and it quickly became spaghetti. But through sheer willpower and a couple of YouTube tutorials, I got it all set up and ready. So now I got these hands in front of me that wiggle about as I do the moves, like running, wall jumping, floating, and a cool pose for sliding on the floor. I also created this feature where you can do a front-facing wall run, which plays this animation that kind of strokes the wall and gives you a bit of a boost upwards. And even after I had all the animation, I tweaked so many aspects of the movement, dialing in the speed, the jump height, slide speed, transitions, just all of it. And also created this thing called Coyote Time when jumping off ledges. If you're not familiar with Coyote Time, it basically allows you to still jump after a fraction of a second after we leave the edge. This is quite common in many movement-based games like platformers, and it just makes the timing of jumping feel a lot better and is a little bit less punishing. With the movement being in a really good place, it was time to figure out what this game was actually about. So we need to talk about story. So quite early in the process, I wanted to set this game in a larger world, specifically in the world of Black Horizon. Black Horizon is a sci-fi world that I've been building over the last couple of years and features everything from interstellar imperialism to rogue alien raiders. If you want to learn more about this world, I actually did a video on the world itself on my channel, which you can check out if you want. So my idea for the game is that you play as a conduit. In Black Horizon, conduits are super soldiers who can bend electromagnetic fields to their will. And in this world, all conduits are artificially created and trained by this big empire called Yulia. So the idea for this game is that you play as a conduit in training at one of Yulia's secret training facilities. So to set the stage for all this to take place, I had to start making some kind of secret facility where all this could take place. Kind of like in Portal, but more like a military base. So back in Blender, I planned out some big levels and a surrounding military base for the secret super soldier training facility. And the centerpiece is going to be this big skyscraper with an observation deck. I imagine this is where all the overseers, they kind of sit and judge you as you fail to advance in the game. I see. Now with all this talk of super soldiers, military bases and so on, it really got me thinking about combat, enemies and epic weapons. So I started playing around with some game mechanics where the character has a sword, but not just any sword, a sword that unfolds, folds. And now that I had a sword, I needed some enemies to hit, so I created a few simple enemies, and I was hacking away at the enemies. But then I thought, if I have swords, then I gotta have some guns to vary up the combat, so I got working on developing a system for guns. And I came up with this idea for having modular guns where the player can make their own weapons, so I created lots of modules for that, and then it hit me. I'd been down this road before. I started out trying to make a simple game, but the features just creep in and makes it more and more complicated to make. Now I got swords, enemies and modular gun systems, and too much for me to develop and finish for me right now, especially as a single developer. So instead I decided to refocus my energy into making the best movement game I could right now, and just making that part fun. And don't get me wrong, I really want to do all the other things one day, but I think just focusing in on a simpler game structure this first time is a lot better. So the aim of the game right now is to complete a game where you play as a conduit going through different levels of training for advanced movement. And the game will be geared more towards a speedrunning vibe where you try to beat the levels as fast as you can. And honestly, this has just made me more excited about the game because I feel so much closer to actually getting it done. And if you're interested in supporting this game development project or the world of Black Horizon, then you can check out my support page over on ko-fi.com/criticalgiants. If you sign up, you get exclusive access to a section of my Discord where I post regular work in progress updates to this game and a lot of world building stuff for Black Horizon, like sketches, lore breakdown, and so on. And all the support also goes into enabling me to make more videos about all this kind of stuff. Also, I'm trying to get this game onto Steam, and that's probably its own journey. And by the time you're watching this video, it might already be there. So maybe there's something to check out. Either way, I am so excited to keep you updated on this project in the near future. And with that said, I hope that this video was useful and insightful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. You can also leave a comment if you have anything to discuss or ask. And if you want to follow us in the future, then subscribe and hit that notification bell.